But what we try to do from a brand experience point of view is build an experience that is unobtrusive, that is immersive, and that is part of the consumer journey.
This is Advertising in Africa with Dele Odugbemi on Africa Business Radio.
Hi, welcome again to another episode of Advertising in Africa with me, Dele Odugbemi. Today I have with me Tunji Adeyinka, who I will introduce in a minute, but it's important for me to say that he's a friend who wears many hats, become a mentor, a former client, all of those rolled into one, but the most important part is that he's a friend. So welcome, Tunji.
Thank you very much, Dele.
Tunji's background is very interesting. He'd like to tell the story from having been a copywriter in one ages, but that's the least people know him for. But that is the beginning of his journey in advertising. Started as a copywriter, and later, has got more known for what we now know as experiential. But at some point in the course of our journey, it was actually called event marketing. Mm-hmm. As things then evolved, then you had all these things rolled in that was called sponsorship and action marketing and all of that. So, but the best person to introduce Tunji is Tunji himself. So please tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dele. Good to see you. I'm a village boy.
Okay, that part I missed.
So Tunji Adeyinka is, as I would put it, is someone who is a marketing person, stumbled into marketing, I would say, by accident. First degree English history, second degree international relations. Then ASU happened, as ASU used to happen in those days. And at the peak of the ASU strike, just took a trip to do a copy test. And that's actually how I stumbled into advertising. So I did a copy test and then got employed as a copywriter with a Saatchi agency in Lagos in those days. And that was where the journey started. So I've worked in marketing, I say, close to 30 years now, starting in core advertising from the MCNA, which was a Saatchi agency in those days, and then moved to Roosevelt and then did a stint at a private agency before moving to direct marketing, which Tequila had started at that point. And Tequila was actually where I started to go into experiential marketing, which, as you said, was called different things, has been called different things, whether it's engagement marketing to action marketing, whatever. And then I then worked with MTN for about 6-7 years, where I started the sponsorship desk in those days before I moved into the role as a general manager for business marketing in MTN. Did that for a few years and then left to start with a few partners to start a company called Connect Marketing, which is a below-the-line company specializing in sports marketing, face-to-face, trade marketing, direct marketing. And from there, then started this network which is called Republicom with, again, yet other partners. Republicom has a suite of companies, about 5 different companies, which are working in different areas to help African businesses grow. And we're in the different areas, whether we're talking about advertising, design, direct marketing, PR, research, again, face-to-face, media, and the whole works. And that is where I sit today.
Okay, great background. The topic for today is about the experiential offering post-pandemic. And it's quite important to talk about because it's topical. The issue is pretty much what is experiential is a lot on the outside.
Yeah.
A lot you need is a heart of home.
Correct.
Touch points, experience, concepts and so on. Mm-hmm. And for the best part of the last 18 months, we have been indoor. Mm-hmm. And naturally, you guys didn't just fold your arm and just, didn't earn any money over the last 18 months. So, which means the business that was predominantly outdoor has evolved, without a doubt. So, just thought it was a good idea for us to share what the impact of the pandemic has been on the business and how it's therefore evolved, and take that into what the future of the business can be.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dilip. That's a very important discussion. So brand experience, as we know it, is a practice that takes the product or the brand to a level where the consumer is able to experience that brand, is able to touch, feel, smell, is able to hear, just appeal to all the senses in a way that it tells the brand story in a live manner. We say that advertising waves at the consumer, for example, but what experience does, what we try to do, is to bring the meaning of the brand to life, either by the consumer coming in contact with the brand physically or coming in contact through an experience which the brand curates.
You guys take the consumer to dinner.
And if you look at the way that marketing has evolved over time, there's so many challenges and so many changes along the route. You have in some markets, you have people who actually are paying to block adverts because they're tired of adverts and tired of the way that those adverts tend to them. So, but what we try to do from a brand experience point of view is build an experience that is unobtrusive, that is immersive, and that is part of the consumer journey. And in that manner, you seed the brand message without causing any wahala, as we put it. So what happens where you have a situation where you are not going out for upwards of 12 months, 18 months? What happens where sports centers are closed, bars are closed, and really any opportunity that you had to have a live experience was shut down? What happened was that the brand experience story goes beyond the live experience. And what happened was that companies pivoted to creating experience in different manners that went beyond live. So we started to have digital engagements. And again, the issue is always that how can you have digital engagements at scale? So some of the examples that you saw very clearly was the Champions League final was coming up. And what would typically happen is in a market like Nigeria, you would have people sit down to watch that.
Experience.
Exactly. But that kind of experience could not be brought to life at that point in time. And then, but what you had was to have an experience where you had a Zoom kind of viewing. And as you had people viewing on Zoom, you had commentary from different football legends. And they were watching on DSTV, but they were able to then come together as a community, because one of the things that football fans like to do is banter. So you provide a platform for them to banter. You provide a platform for them to still socialize, albeit not in a physical way. And those are some of the things that happen at the peak of that lockdown where nobody could move. The other thing is in the area of trade engagement. So now the consumer could not go to the stores. So we are the people that you meet in the stores trying to promote the brand and do all of that. So, but then the guy couldn't go to the store. But the guy was ordering from home. So he was doing e-commerce. He was doing all of that. And what a lot of forward-looking companies then did was to still try and create an experience which the consumer was able to interact with on the e-commerce channel, and then got something delivered to them beyond the product. And so those were the things that happened at that time. Another thing that happened was then that you found that a lot of brand experience engagements were amplified more through content marketing. So it meant that it wasn't just about the event, it was about the storytelling and what you recorded and then what people could experience. And even though I can't go to an art exhibition, I could see an art exhibition, I could wear my VR glasses, and it's almost like I was in there. So
like you were immersed.
Exactly. So it's all those things which were brought up at that time. And what you then find is that even as life is going back to normal, those things are not going to go away.
That was my interest.
Yes.
The metaverse, to look at what it is that we were doing and look at, we've had an 18 months, let's say, impact of that has necessitated change.
Yes.
And then that evolution permanent, therefore, where you just are not either going to go into the event-based experiential thing anymore, or that is now a mix of both. What do you see?
Yeah, what is going to happen is what we call the hybrid. Yeah, because human beings just like to relate on a physical basis. It's just the way we're created. We like to socialize. We like to relate. We like to talk to another human being close to us. We like to exchange experiences and do all of that. So what we are settling into is a hybrid. So what you find in a lot of cases is that for every live experience which you are now finding that is coming up, there is now a virtual side to that.
Yeah.
So we're growing to a world where both of them are going to live side by side. That is the reality. Because if you think about it, and if you think about it in the context of our market specifically, you'll find that digital penetration is still a bit slow in certain areas of the market, especially at the lower demographics. So to expect that the woman in Oshun or Isei or in Kotangora is going to be watching a live match on Zoom or doing all of that, is really assuming a lot.
Yeah.
So you have to still work at the level of the SMS. You still have to work at the level of the WhatsApp and the rest of them. So the mobile is going to become a tool for experience. The billboard is going to become a tool for that experience. So you're going to have all of that. So if you think about what just happened now, which is the audio side as well, the likes of Siri, the likes of the Alexa and the rest of them will become part of this experience. Some of these experiences will be triggered from that point, but once it's triggered from that point, then you then have different touch points where you can relate and have the experience. That is the world that we are in now.
As all of this has started emerging, so you have, like I said, a bit of necessity. So we knew digital was going to happen.
Yeah.
It was a question of when, and we thought we had all the time in the world to blend it in.
Yeah.
We've had to accelerate that now. But as we do that, the question that plays on my mind is always, and I particularly in running an outdoor company now, that, what has happened has certainly impacted us. And that question therefore plays on a lot of people's mind is, how does that impact, your ability to earn? I.e., when you had this product or service that was about events, touch and feel, all of that, that was costed in some kind of way.
Correct.
That the client had settled into. And,
Correct.
So there was even all the issue about return on investment, measurement of X, Y, and Z, those who come to the concert and those kind of things. And now we throw this dynamic into it that says there will be a hybrid of sorts, or all of that. But then first the question is that, how does that impact your ability? And do you still go to that client and say, well, what you used to pay me at that point, pay me that now? Or do you recognize that now that there is a different component to what you do, the pricing method then has to change?
The pricing method has to change, but the most important component is that for companies, you need to move your offering from the low level to a much higher level. You need to begin to engage at the level where your value component is higher, because you are going to be looking to earn fees which are not necessarily tied to activity.
Okay.
Because what you had is that the number of people who were in the hall was how you charged.
Yes.
And therefore that activity was what your earning was based on. But the kind of engagements that you need to have going forward are the kind of engagements where it's not really about the number of people who sat in the hall. So you're not talking, so if you're talking about reach, for example, you're talking about that, you're still talking about your cost per reach, but you're looking at that in terms of data and looking at the quality of the reach. So who am I reaching? What are they able to buy? What is the earning power of the people that I'm reaching? And so on and so forth. And by the way, virtual events are not necessarily less difficult to run, I find, than physical event. But what is happening now, and that is a key thing with a lot of companies, is that to move to a place where your earning is not so much on your interaction in terms of the number of people you brought into the hall. You need to now begin to move it into a place where it is fulfilling a better evidence-based return to the client. So, which is why you find that a lot of brand experience companies, especially the ones that are worth their while, are beginning to invest more in data, beginning to invest more in technology, like, VR, AR, and the rest of them. Beginning to invest more in a better understanding of the consumer so that you are able to measure the return that you bring to the client. So you are right that so when we were looking fully virtual, of course, the billings went down. There was no way you could tell the client. Yeah, so you couldn't tell the client that I'm going to earn what I earned at that time, especially if you didn't have a retainership. So, but that has changed now. You're still having the virtuals now. And one industry that was particularly impacted, if I remember, was, in South Africa, you found that the drinks industry was seriously impacted. And there was, for a very long time, it looked like they were saying nobody must drink alcohol in this place. So, and what that meant was that the agencies that were working with for those clients could not have those activations in HoReCa. They couldn't have those things in those areas. But now, so as things started to roll back, they started to go back to do those things, but they were doing them differently now. And I've seen some very good examples from brands like Diageo and the rest of them in terms of the kind of engagement that they had, which was more controlled, which was more COVID compliant, COVID sensitive, but the value was there. And if you could bring, say, before you could bring 10,000 people into a concert, now they would bring maybe 500 or 300 people, but they invest more money in amplifying that and
so
telling
taking
the story.
It beyond the audience at the venue,
exactly,
taking it into the other spaces.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So the natural way to take this conversation is whether or not Africa is there. The reason the Africa question is always on the table is because our own, whether it's penetration of digital as the alternative and all that, as we pointed out before, is not as great. So the woman in saying, would not be the one. So digital isn't therefore the automatic complement. Because we're looking for a complement. Isn't the automatic complement. That shouldn't we therefore be looking for what works in our own environment, given that the digital is a solution elsewhere because that solution is there. So if we don't have that, what are the possible complementary things we could do that can in some way still uncover business opportunities for you?
So I've seen some very interesting work from experiential agencies at the bottom of the pyramid. I've seen communities, I've seen women coming together like societies, of course in a safe way, where you couldn't do a WhatsApp blast or you couldn't do a digital blast, but again they were able to come together and using word of mouth, creating experience which they could relate to each other and which they could then pass to different communities. So a lot of that is happening. So not even looking at SMS only. Now, of course, you have enhanced SMS where you could do, more text than you could formerly.
Rich
exactly. So you have that on the one side. The other side that companies are beginning to use a lot more is audio. So, which means that I can use radio to trigger an experience and to bring people together.
Podcast.
So, and the thing is that, but when I see research and it tells me that podcasts are growing in different markets, especially in the Middle East and also somewhat in Africa, I say sometimes that in Africa is overstated. Because what we call the classic podcast in Europe and America is not what we have here in a lot of cases. So when we're talking to the woman in Isaleko, for example, it's not so much of a podcast. It's just that I've done an audio recording. The audio recording is 5 minutes, and I've looked for a way to distribute it.
What's that voice note?
Whether I'm doing it via conventional radio or I'm doing it via the phone, I'm finding a way to get it to the low end of the community. So digital penetration and digital amplification and transformation would mean something different for us from markets where penetration is higher. the number of smartphones, we keep looking at that trend, keeps growing, but we also know that the incidence of 2 phones is also high in Nigeria. So what it means is that the penetration, if you had, say, 50% or 60% of the population with smartphones, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going down to every local government. It only means that somebody is having 4 or 3. And it also doesn't mean that the woman down there knows how to use the smartphone. But it means that as it comes to audio, which is, it now knows that it can get radio on that smartphone. So I need to prepare the kind of content that would go to radio on that smartphone, and that would trigger the coming together with their community at that low end.
That's interesting. I was always thinking of one possible digital impact that we might not have looked at, which the situation has required for us to do, but we haven't been quite deliberate about it, and that's basically the concept of remote working. So the challenge with anything physical, as the last 18 months has shown us, is that the alternatives we kind of needed to seek was some sort of remote, where you almost kind of now need to centralize the information and activate remotely.
Yeah.
Now, before now, you had that concept of a physical needing to get together, rehearsal, all of that prior to the execution, and all of that was quite physical.
Yeah.
That if that is now maybe in some way digital,
yes,
which might mean that, back to the point you made about a safe way of doing it, that what was dangerous in the pre-pandemic was the aggregation.
Correct.
The 40,000 the 50,000 crowd. That if you unpack that to the 500 crowd,
correct,
then you're realizing that you don't need a 400,000 seater stadium to do it. And that, is it possible that we don't think of what we do from that need to aggregate anymore?
Correct.
We think of it as something that can be centralized, yet executed in
those different nodes,
environment, but where the resource requirement is therefore now less, because you're not needing to move the generator, all of those things. If this was to become the practice, what's the impact of that on pricing?
So, as I said earlier, if I look at the reach, my reach will still be 400,000, but it's not 400,000 in one location. My budget is even probably now lower, right?
Why?
Because I'm reaching 400,000, but I am doing that in different nodes, nodes of 50s, nodes of 100s, and the rest of them. But my production cost is one-off. So my production is centralized. The scripting, production of the experience, translating to different languages is centralized. So what I'm then doing is then spending more money to push it to those different communities. And therefore, if I told you, for example, how much I would pay in some venues, I mean, you would know that if I was spending half of that in doing this, I would be spending less. So what it means is that my modus of charging the client has to change. It has to be one. And there's a case study that, we're dealing with now for one of the experiential companies who are looking at app downloads. And they are saying in that particular case that, if I did it in the traditional way, I would have X number of people in different locations. They would dance, they would carry a music system, they would do all of this, they would have, and then all of that will go. But you know that my cost per contact will be about 1,000 naira.
Okay.
But if I'm doing this with a tool which I have here, which I can install remotely through Google Store or whatever it is on everybody or every phone. And I then have people in different communities who are actually then reliving the experience to the people and showing them, then my cost per contact goes down to 100 naira instead of 700
10%.
Exactly. Because what I'm doing is I am going to incentivize the people who are passing the message. And the incentive is that I'm going to pay you 100 naira for each person that you're talking to. So the client says, wow. So before I was spending 700 naira times 10,000. Now you're asking me to pay 100 naira times 10,000. So it makes more sense. But then to do that, I must begin to develop platforms. I must begin to develop.
Explain now. What is that?
So if I am not going to use the proprietary platforms like WhatsApp or all those things that exist, I must create my own platform, which I can then use to disburse that message. And when I do that, it means that what I'm charging is the 100 naira I split with the guy who is distributing the message. And that is, my business model is different. And I also charge for the ideation.
For some reason, I thought this was always going to be more expensive. So and that's why it's important to always bring in people with experience and expertise. Tunji, this has been wonderful. It's been a good
Are we done?
time to don't let it walk. 30 minutes runs very fast. So I can't thank you enough for making that. We definitely will have to continue this because there is so much to share, realizing that now. But this was always the first attempt at it, to first share, with the public how I get a wealth of experience and all that, and build on it subsequently going forward. So I'd like to thank you for making time for this episode, for sharing your knowledge, for walking through Lagos traffic to get to the studio. So I can be contacted on my LinkedIn as a follow-up to this. You can just type Dele Odugwemi and then you just get access to me. And Tunji, how can they reach you for further details?
Yeah, Tunji Adeyinka on LinkedIn. Yeah, there are very few, but I think Tunji Adeyinka would be
the proper one.
Would be the proper one.
The one that'll get to you.
Exactly, yeah.
Again, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Dele. It's very, very nice to talk to you.
Great. Thank you for listening.